So now that I'm done with Let's Go, let me say by no means am I about to claim I came up with this on my own. The video is in the description, but there are some areas that increase this possibility, if you can believe it. 1. Lysandra's red hair and blue eyes are recessive when compared to Lusamine's blonde hair and green eyes. Her mother would only need to possess these traits for Lusamine to look the way that she does. When accounting for Lusamine's high heels, just comparing her to Moan shows Lusamine to be very tall. The fact Lily is taller than two boys who are supposedly older than her, and the comparison of height between her and Gladia and Lily to Lusamine, it could be argued Lusamine is actually only barely taller than her daughter, which would suggest Moan's height is the real contributor to their children's height. An unexplained connection between Sycamore and the Ather Foundation. As you all might recall, in one of the Ather Foundation's trailers exists a machine to use the Zygarde Cube to reconstruct Zygarde cells and cores. When talking to a scientist, he says that he heard the Zygarde Cube was found by a professor in the Kalos region called Sycamore. The way he addresses him would suggest Sycamore is not very famous, so his connection to the Ather Foundation or why he'd warrant their cooperation on this matter is never explained. But if Lysandre is the founder of the Ather Foundation, nothing more need be known. Sycamore and Lysandre were very close for one reason or another. The common interpretation is that Lysandre was a student of Sycamore, but with Lusamine being over 40, if he was indeed her father, this doesn't seem as likely, or not nearly as much so. Lysandre was the owner of Lysandre Labs, and in the world of Pokemon was likely considered a very eccentric and wealthy figure, making it likely that he was a very busy man. When explaining about himself, he brings up Sycamore in passing. And it seems that's where it started and grew from there, as opposed to being a student of Sycamore's, and they were close enough for the professor to be pretty down, and allow him to give a much less enthusiastic explanation regarding him. There are some differences between Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon that may have a great significance on this issue. In Sun and Moon, during the UB episode, it is explained that Annabelle was found 10 years ago by Looker and Nanu while on a mission to deal with an Ultra Beast. Being a Guzzlord, my interpretation, as it also seems to be with other fans, is that this follows the experiment Moan went missing after, which would explain why Lily doesn't mention her father. Especially when telling the player about her past. Moan is never brought up by name beyond the Dimensional Research Lab. This is also presumed to be the first time Lusamine first came in contact with a Nihilego. 8 years later is when Gladion claims to have been left with Null, but his reasoning is different depending on the title. In Sun and Moon, he apologizes to Lily at Seaf Oak Village by saying all he could think about was finding a way to save Null. But in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, he states all he could think about was they had to get stronger. Considering Lusamine's ability to empathize without needing a connection with the person first, as we see is required in her final on-screen appearance in Sun and Moon, as opposed to her interactions with Gladion and Cosmog within her trophy room in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, her lack of any obsession with Nihilego in particular, with her being noticeably more surprised by Nihilego's appearance at Aether Paradise, as opposed to in Sun and Moon, all of this evidence would suggest that Moan only went missing 2 years ago as opposed to 10, which begs the question. Why did Gladion feel that Null was in danger 2 years ago specifically? Well, let's consider the timeline and overlap it with X and Y. As Dexio says, the events where a group of 5 trainers were given Pokedexes was something that happened in the past. The only other evidence to suggest time has gone by is a footnote next to Grimsley's name for his most official artwork that says 2 years later. It's unclear if this means 2 years since his first artwork or since his appearance in Black 2 and White 2, even though the latter is the common interpretation of this. Especially combined with Dexio's comment and the undeniable evidence X and Y take place after Black 1 and White 1, is mention of the Riches who owned a villa in those games before it was torn down by Black 2 and White 2 to discover Reversal Mountain. So if we overlap the stories, 8 years before X and Y, Lusamine is attacked. Lysandre is most likely contacted immediately, which most likely leads him to hurry to Alola as fast as he can, out of concern for his daughter. After Lusamine wakes up, she eventually insists upon beginning her research with the intent of rescuing Moan. There are a few things to note here, and that's the philosophy of Lysandre at this stage. Just like Yveltal and Xerneas, Lysandre breaks people into those who give and those who take, coupled with his own experiences in the past, which Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon 100% confirms was written by Lysandre, or at the very least, that interpretation is now canon, which lead to his reason given to why he's finally decided to go through with wiping the slate clean. Lysandre would see his daughter, the current president, or rather worthy to be a representative, of the Ather Foundation as one who gives, and Guzma, the leader of Team Skull and self-proclaimed destruction in human form, as one who takes. The other thing to note is the debate of whether Ultra Beasts are Pokemon. Lusamine seems to believe this is the case, but while grieving over the destruction of Pokemon, Lysandre states the reason why Pokemon are such wonderful beings is because humans have worked with them and they've allowed each other to flourish. Or it's the closest he gets to a reason. Ultra Beasts, on the other hand, are creatures from a completely different world, and one of them attacked his daughter with neurotoxins that he obviously never found a cure for. I would say 3 things lead to Lysandra giving up on Lusamine. 1. Her insistence on saving Moan despite the risk. 2. The realization that Lusamine was simply using Guzma to this end, as while it is implied that Lusamine and Guzma had a falling out after Nihilegu grabbed a hold of Guzma, the only reason she had to bring him along was to help with catching Ultra Beasts. She is a collector with her own giant trophy room of cryogenically frozen Pokemon after all, but once Guzma became unwilling to actually help her, she no longer had any use for him. And finally 3, her eventual obsession with the Ultra Beasts. Like Lusamine, Lysandra's despair spiral probably began with what happened to Lusamine and branched off to unproductive fools are consuming our future. If nothing changes, the world will become ugly and conflicts will raze the land from end to end. As he continued to research his family's legacy concerning the war in Kalos with a now much more jaded lens. Having, presumably, decided Lusamine wasn't worth saving, she was not a part of Team Flare, and so his announcement coupled with that fact was the greatest rejection of Lusamine he could possibly give. Following these events, Lusamine, under the influence of Nihilegu's neurotoxins, sped up the production of her efforts to opening up an ultra wormhole to save someone who actually loved her and that she still loved, Moan. The final thing worth pointing out is the juxtaposition between Lysandra and Cyrus seen in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and comparing how that Lysandra and the one from X and Y are different. Cyrus, like Archie, is left to contemplate after their defeat if they could change, which I can only assume is because the Cyrus in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon is more like the one from Diamond and Pearl, who is genuinely a well-intentioned extremist, as opposed to his Platinum counterpart who recognizes his reasons are petty and so he lies about them to motivate his minions and selectively tells each of the commanders the part of his plan that resonate with them. Same with Archie, who changes regardless or never went down the path depending on the version, abruptly leaving in Sapphire, trying to stop Team Magma and Ruby, returning the orbs alongside Maxie and Emerald after realizing that perhaps in the grand scheme of things, what they were trying to do might have been meaningless. Omega Ruby, where the events make him believe rethinking their positions is warranted moving forward, even sharing with you how it's not hard to imagine Team Aqua would have sought to revive Kyogre. And then in such a world, eventually Archie, after seeing the lengths Mac goes to because of his actions, cries tears of shame. Lysandre, on the other hand, is put in a very different light. He gives you a choice that regardless of what you press will activate the ultimate weapon, especially if this is a lie. At the beginning of battle, he gives a sadistic grin before reverting to frowning throughout the battle, and after a second of considering whether he can change, this is his response. Like Platinum Cyrus, using his knowledge and willpower while being driven by his emotions, gets us whose ideals are corrupted and whose truths are twisted. Lusamine and Guzma, whose characters in both titles are a direct result of the influence other people have had on them, Lysandre seems to be meant to think in a completely different dimension, even saying the following, which leads to the conflict. Even then, unlike Gutsis, there are points where Lysandre has overlap. He wants to make a more beautiful world. He cares about Pokemon. He agrees what AZ did was reprehensible. He's concerned with a growing population and limited resources. And if you choose the right button, he apologizes for Zeroseric activating the ultimate weapon regardless. That being said, every one of those points have a catch. Lysandre decides that in order to make a beautiful world, he needs to kill 99.99% of the population, which will solve both problems only temporarily. AZ's actions are deemed reprehensible, but he then points out how it washed the world of that era's filth. Plus, at the time, he's planning to do even worse, and it's because of the ends Pokemon have been used for that he believes it's a necessary evil to make sure they no longer exist. And he follows up his apology with, once again, the following. Like Lusamine opening the Ultra Wormholes in Sun and Moon, thus unleashing the Ultra Beast because fuck this world and everyone who inhabits it, I want to go to Ultra Space to be with my sweet beasts, they can take out their fury on the Alola for all I care. A Lysandre who actually succeeds in his plans, or even one who got very close to succeeding has, for many, passed the point of no return. And out of the two Lusamine, the only one considered worthy of redemption, just like Guzma, is the one in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, even though X and Y in Sun and Moon say they are worthy of a redemption arc. The problem with that is we don't get to see any of said arcs. So here comes Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon with Lusamine being an actual well-intentioned extremist, whose arc officially ends with her reuniting with an amnesic Moan, and seeing Moan's happiness decides to pretend they never met. While Guzma's relation to Lusamine never breaks off, so he decides to come to Ather Paradise to rescue her when Team Rainbow Rocket takes control of it, which is after showing that this version of Guzma is actually shown to care for his teammates. Following his first defeat, he meets Hal, who helps influence him as a person. Guzma and Plumeria are shown to leave on good terms, in comparison to what could be interpreted as a very bad falling out in Sun and Moon towards Plumeria deciding to retake her island challenge after being convinced by Nanu and Milani. And the end of his arc is instead battling him in a title defense, which, in theory, can only be possible if Guzma finally cleared his own challenge and of course beat the rest of the Elite Four. And this is the way I believe a version of Lysandra can exist without going off the deep end. The end result of being influenced differently like Lusamine and Guzma were, to where Lysandra looks at the same research with a more optimistic set of lens. At Koreaway, Sycamore says that by stopping Team Flare, Lysandra was saved, and that while he understands Lysandra's concerns, what he really wanted was for him to put his ego aside and lead things to greater heights, but he never had this conversation with Lysandra. And before taking on the Pokemon League, your rival, who gets what Lysandra is trying to say, but thinks his methods are insane, recognizes that since their positions force their hands, that they can't really say any of them was right in what led up to that point, as opposed to being in the right, and believes if both sides have something to say, it's best to meet halfway. Stop for a second and ask yourself if a single main series villain has been given this sort of treatment and understanding if they didn't decide to redeem themselves. Giovanni was never given it. Cynthia tried to understand Platinum Cyrus, asking why he doesn't basically isolate himself instead of changing the world, and while she later acknowledges the world is constantly changing and believes that's a good thing, she doesn't want it to become what only a person like Cyrus wants. Getsus is regarded as someone without a human heart, or rather a heartless inhuman monster by Sharon, and truly pitiful by Alder. It's only because N has changed so much in the following 2 years that he tries to reason with someone who even he has a hard time calling him his father, given how he was manipulated from childhood for Getsus' own ends. And even then, that falls on deaf ears because N is trying to appeal to the heart of a cynical, self-obsessed, complete monster. With leaders from alternate universes where they actually succeeded in their goals, many times because they were never challenged by the player, the idea there isn't a world where Lysandra exists as a force for good is hard to believe, and if such worlds exist without the players, there should exist worlds where the players never encountered the team leaders. In fact, Let's Go is essentially such a world, where the Pokedex was never made when Red, Blue, and Green left Pallet Town, and where instead it is suggested that after losing to Red and Blue, Giovanni abandoned his gym to form Team Rocket. In Let's Go, the player also receives an autograph from Lieutenant Surge before receiving the Thunder Badge, strongly suggesting this is something that he does for every challenger, and while he doesn't do it in the worlds of Sun and Moon, he does do this in the worlds of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So like Let's Go had Red, Blue, and Green leave on their respective journeys years before Team Rocket was even formed, Professor Sycamore could have chosen the same 5 trainers without them encountering Team Flare because Lysandra never even formed them to begin with, much like Giovanni with Team Rocket at the time. Much of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon ended up showing us how some leaders can be redeemed as opposed to leaving such an arc up in the air, and showed Lysandra at his worst, just like we've seen with Lusamine and Guzma in Sun and Moon. Also, in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Looker, who we know has been to Kalos to hunt down Team Flare, only chooses to reference Team Plasma and Galactic's goals, what would be his most recent case, as if it didn't even happen. I can only hope. This is Lysandra's character description on the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon website that a single episode could not completely convey. He is by nature a man of deep sympathies, but he has been driven to despair by watching humans fighting and struggling against one another, and he comes to believe that the only way for people to live in beauty without strife or struggle is by reducing the number of people living in the world. End quote. I think this is one of the biggest things that the 2019 games, if they aren't Diamond and Pearl remakes, will include. Lysandra will have his black color swapped for white, while keeping his red for the exact reverse visual cue to players, and the people mentioned to also be researching the legend of Xerneas and Yveltal, both of which will still be dormant because Team Flare didn't exist, at Anastar will be part of the threat. That's my prediction. This will be a story to unite everything. Unova, Northern Kalos, Alola, and 3,000 years of history while potentially setting up for the previous 1,700 years that have so far gone unaccounted for. And chances are they will involve the star pulses mentioned in both Sun and Moon and Ultrasun and Ultramoon. How am I so sure? Simple. Kalos has connections it simply shouldn't have with Pokemon that shouldn't be there. The legendary birds connected to the Sea Spirit's Den, and even Xerneas and Yveltal with the writings that mention them being only around 1,000 years. What did Professor Juniper say about those Darmanitan? Even if we account for the legendary birds migrating to other regions, the same could certainly not be made for Xerneas. This and many other areas seen throughout the Pokemon world leads me to believe that Southern Kalos and Northern Kalos smashed into one another, creating the mountain range that divides them, just like I believe is the case with Mount Coronet. But that many more places in Southern Kalos are related to previous regions and potentially regions yet unseen, and that this is where Zygarde will finally have its chance to shine. Solgaleo and Lunala's origins apart from Necrozma will be explored, and one of two legendaries will be there to represent Kalos' second legendary Pokemon, and Kalos' relationship to Unova will finally be revealed. Just like Platinum, this is the fourth and final story to a series, the grand culmination of all the games that had gone before, and the Diamond and Pearl remakes will complement the ninth story, which will begin the third series while tying it to the 2019 game, which will begin production following the release of the 2019 game. But of course, what will happen after 2019 is anyone's guess. Will they take a year off? Will Crystal remakes be a thing to partially stall for time following the remakes of Diamond and Pearl? Will the 2019 games be the definitive, or at least the only, version? Who honestly knows? Black One and White One took 4 years after all, and between the 4 options they could easily fill things leading up to the true 8th region. But yes, those are my predictions and my reasoning for them. Thematically, potentially, based on the available evidence, a now established trend, and so on, that is my prediction. We will be returning to Kalos starting from the southern side, and it will be that grand culmination of the games that have gone before. And whether I'm wrong or not, I think will be answered fairly shortly. So is this the thing that I finally get right? Or is this another example to show that for all my trying, I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about? If you actually manage to enjoy these 2 videos, be on the lookout for a much longer video that I've been working on for much longer. You can expect that sometime in early May. Until my next random upload.